Hi folks, you're Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to come back to the war in Ukraine at the moment, the Russian-Ukrainian war. Now, I've received a few messages saying, even though I'm dealing with a specific point in time, people coming, you don't understand the issues of Ukraine, you don't know the history of it, blah, blah, blah. And if I'm ill-informed on this, then indeed so are the people that are trying to point out the shortcoming of any essay I may have put forward. So I want to address some of those things, but primarily to talk about bringing an end to this war. Now, President Trump's been quite open about this. So pretense that the shock and the outrage that comes from the globalist controlled puppet stooges, Trump's erratic, we didn't know, how could we know? I mean, President Trump, or candidate Trump beforehand, was very, very clear about this. He wanted to bring an end to the war and believed that the parties would have to come to the table and there was going to have to be some negotiation, but the war should come to an end. There's a lot of people dying, and quite unnecessarily so. Nothing will be achieved at the end of the day from all those deaths. The idea that the Zelensky and the Ukrainians are fighting for democracy and liberty is bullshit, absolute and total propaganda bullshit. But let's get to that. I guess. It appears to be, and I may be wrong, it appears to be that President Trump and his team are really relegating Zelensky, the supposed Ukraine president, are really relegating Zelensky to a second tier negotiating status or position. Now, is this acceptable? Is this desirable? Is it sensible? Is it reasonable? Is it part of some productive negotiating tactic? The bottom line is Zelensky is not the president of anything. He's a globalist controlled puppet asset. That's all he is. He's nothing other than that. That's all he is. He's been installed by the globalists. He's a puppet controlled by the globalists. He does what the globalists tell him to do. The whole Ukrainian government structure and administrative structure, media structure is all funded by US aid and various other corrupt, fraudulent globalist money machines and money laundering entities. So Ukraine doesn't exist as a government. It's a state without a government. What is there, or anything that is there, is simply a creation of, and it's instructed and controlled by the globalists. So we need to come to grips with that. So this claim that Zelensky's fighting for democracy or fighting for freedom, utter and total bullshit. It's just a globalist asset and needs to be seen as that. Now, the globalists, therefore, to treat Zelensky or his, any of the administrative team around him as being a legitimate government is beyond absurd. But nonetheless, he's the guy theoretically tasked with the responsibility, but that responsibility, he may take the fall, but it's the globalists that are pulling the strings and controlling him and directing him and instructing him, writing his scripts. I don't think Zelensky can get in front of the camera on anything without the globalists having written the script for him. In the last few days is certainly testament to that. Now, given that the globalists want the war to continue, how they plan to continue it without US funding is they're trying to get Britain and the other European countries to step up to fill the gap. I don't think that's going to work, but it's the globalists that are having a shot at that, trying to mobilise the EU to. I think that would be unwise in the extreme, but the globalists are so desperate to bring Russia into the globalist sort of program, or the globalist ideology, which of course involves race, gender, hustling, grifting, LGBTQ marches, and all this sort of thing. Russia is holding out as a civilizational entity and a cultural entity, and they're holding out as that, and from what I can see, proudly so. And this outrages the globalists, drives them into apoplectic rage. How dare they do that? We must crush them And as with the imposition of any ideology, the collateral damage is seen as irrelevant and incidental. And so all these people that are dying, the massive expenditure of blood and treasure, that's okay because we're creating an ideological paradise, and no expense is too great in pursuit of this paradise. And that's really what's about the globalists trying to bring Russia to heel, and Putin won't have any of it. So he's look, Hitler, and that which is their go-to, the first go-to, and anyone that doesn't do what the globalists want automatically is becomes Hitler in the propaganda machine context. Now, on the matter of given that Zelensky is a completely bought and paid for and controlled globalist asset, why would you want him at the negotiating table? He actually has no authority. I mean, I don't think Zelensky can even take a shit without the globalist, signing off on it and approving it. So what is he going to bring to the table as some nominal pretend front man for the globalist puppet regime? And I mean, what is he actually going to do or contribute? By President Trump and the administration saying he's actually not really a contributor to this. I mean, should he even be sitting at a front row seat? Now, if he wants the authority to represent the Ukrainian people, then this has to be reflected in an election or some choice where the Ukrainian people say, yep, this is the guy we want to front the negotiations or lead the country or lead the government or this sort of thing. So President Trump and his team are saying, well, look, if you've got some validity as a real, genuine representative of the Ukrainian people, then fine, then you've got a seat at the table. But at the moment, you're nothing more than a globalist flunky stooge, controlled, scripted, and directed by the globalist cabal. So, you don't really represent the Ukrainian people. You certainly don't represent democracy or the rule of law or due legal process or free press. You don't represent any of that. So really, you've got no place at the table. Now, whatever you think, Putin may or may not, the validity of the voting in Russia or so on, he is the legitimate, guy to be dealing with in terms of, Russian statecraft and politics. So he obviously must have a seat at the table. Rightly so, in my view. Zelensky, not so much. Should the main force that's bankrolling the war, as in giving money to Ukraine to fight a futile thing in the hope that somehow Russia may buckle under the strain of it all, then it's back to this Cold War thing. We'll just outspend them. We'll outspend them. That'll show them who's boss. That sort of geopolitical structure doesn't exist anymore, as it did in the Reagan years, for example. So that's a pointless exercise and just a pipe dream. So Russia isn't suffering anywhere near as much as they thought and hoped Russia might. Russia's able to continue to prosecute the war without going to the expense in blood and treasure they hoped the Russians would have to go to. So the reality is nothing is being achieved by this. And so the war needs to end in as much as it's pointless, futile, and a waste of everybody's time. And it's reasonably so that it should end. So somehow a legitimate Ukrainian government or representative needs to be found. And it's not Zelensky. He's a globalist asset. Putin, of course, is the legitimate representative of the Russian government and the state, and the US is the primary bankroller of that conflict, again giving money to Ukraine to prosecute the war. So if you withdraw that financial support, the Europeans can't fill that gap, or not with any sort of reliability or continuity in the way that the Americans could. So really, the war has to come to an end. It can't continue. If the war continues with significantly reduced military aid to Ukraine, then the whole country will be invaded and will be, controlled by Russia and so on. So, is that an outcome you want? So, negotiation is the only way through this. And President Trump quite rightly has pointed out that we need to bring the war to an end. Let's find a way of doing it. I've mentioned before in previous videos that the disputed areas in eastern Ukraine, will need to be, again, a referendum perhaps, determine what the people want there. Maybe that should be administered by some independent third party. I don't know, the government of Iceland or something. maybe someone with absolutely zero skin in the game could administer that and give some oversight for it. Crimea is a little bit more difficult. That may be divided. Maybe parts of it will be Ukraine, and maybe the major ports will be free ports or something. I don't know. There can be discussion there, but again, there'll be a Russian presence and a primary presence in Ukraine, in Crimea. Now, so the war can be written, but I think they have to find a legitimate representative for Ukraine. It's not Zelensky, unless the people want to vote for him, in which case he would be. But there needs to be some sort of electoral decision-making process there, and there needs to be a vote to demonstrate that the people are supporting Zelensky as the president, or someone else. But preferably it's going to be someone else that is not controlled and directed by the globalists. This is the important thing. And they then can negotiate a peace deal in good faith with the Russians and, of course, the Americans. And I think that's the outcome. Coming back to the history of, again, I've been, some people sort of sent messages to me saying, you don't understand the history, in the year 800 AD. This, I don't know how germane that is or relevant it is to the issue today. The point that they raised was that there's always been animus between Ukraine and Russia, even back in the Tsarist days, or even going back to the days when, there was, vastly changing boundaries all over the place. The kingdom of Poland and Lithuania and Swedish invasions of Ukraine and Belarusia and so on. And this has gone back and forth over time, over many hundreds of years, with boundaries shifting back and forth. So there's been ongoing animus, including, by the way, as evil as the Nazis were, they granted, independence to Ukraine, and there were many Ukrainians that believed they were now free of the Soviet Union, and before that, Russia. Ukraine was called a Little Russia, as were other places. So the Tsar was Tsar of all the Russias, meaning not just Russia itself, but all these satellite states, such as Belarusia, such as Georgia and Kazakhstan, all these places. They were Little Russias. So it was Tsar of all the Russias. And so this has been going on for a long time. That doesn't change anything at all to do with should the war come to an end and should a genuine independent sovereign representative of the Ukrainian state be at the negotiating table. The answer is yes. Now, the thing about the war with Russia starting, that Russia was provoked endlessly to try and get Putin to bite, which he eventually did. So as soon as he did bite things, look, Hitler, and so there's that. But the reality was NATO and the globalists using NATO as a cat's paw were desperately trying to provoke Russia into some sort of action, and which happened. And this was then the pretext. Well, we're the good guys. He's the bad guy. Look, they started it. It's not quite that simple. But regardless, the point, they wanted to get Russia because they wouldn't fold into the globalist ideological project. That's all it was. And so now, and Ukraine was a useful device to precipitate a conflict. But that needs to come to an end. It's achieving, as I say, achieving nothing and producing nothing worthwhile. So let's bring the conflict to an end. And to do that, a sovereign representative of Ukraine needs to be found. So President Trump's thing about, well, if Zelensky gets elected to something, then he can participate fully in have a seat at the big table. But until then, it's going to have to be a Russia-US negotiation. And I understand that and agree with it. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.